Mad Max: Fury Road. My experience with Mad Max: Fury Road is probably similar to a lot of people's. I heard they were making yet another decades-later sequel/reboot to a mostly forgotten property, and I rolled my eyes. Then I saw the balls-to-the-wall trailer last spring and thought, damn, this actually looks visually interesting. What an understatement that turned out to be. Then I actually saw the movie this summer and was utterly floored by it. Combine that with the overwhelmingly positive critical reviews, and I realized this movie is something special. The movie picks up more or less where the last Mad Max movie left off, but you really don't need to have seen or even know much about the previous films to follow this one. As is covered in the first 2 minutes of Fury Road, it's after the apocalypse, society has fallen into a mostly lawless wasteland, and Max Rokitansky, once played by Mel Gibson, now played by Tom Hardy, once had a family but they've died. And now he just wanders the desert in jaded isolation. At the start of the movie, Max is captured by a group of war boys, devotees to a cult centered around the tyrannical Immortan Joe, played by Hugh Keys-Byrne, who reigns by hoarding precious water from the masses. Max is imprisoned and used as a literal blood bag, the source of constant transfusions for a sickly little war boy named Nux, played by Nicholas Hoult. Meanwhile, Immortan Joe sends out his war rig, operated by one of his lieutenants, Imperator Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron, to retrieve gasoline from the nearby gas town. However, Furiosa has plans of her own, as she steers the war rig off course, and Immortan Joe realizes that she's taken his wives, who he keeps as breeding stock. Joe pursues them, as do his war boys, including Nux and Max, as Furiosa attempts to escape to what she calls the Green Place. The first thing people praise about Mad Max: Fury Road is the visuals, and the first thing they complain about is the simplistic story. I'll cover both. First, the visuals. They're unlike anything I've ever seen. I don't know how else to put it. This will almost certainly go down as one of the best action movies ever made. Simple as that. The color palette, the lighting, the mix of wide and tight shots, the stunts, the blend of CGI with practical effects, they all mesh together beautifully to make a fast-paced splendor that's full to bursting with action. And I have to praise not only director George Miller for envisioning all of this, but also the editor, Miller's wife, Margaret Sixel. Editing is immeasurably important for movies like this, and that's what separates Fury Road from things like Transformers. Not only did the editing involve splicing different stunts into the same frame, or speeding up shots to ramp up the dynamics, but she's also careful about putting the focal point of each shot in the center of the frame. When there's 100 cuts in a 60-second span, it's easy to get confused with all the moving parts. But when keeping a consistent focal point, the continuity makes the action seem much more natural and easier for our eyes to follow, even when there's constant cuts and shots that last a fraction of a second. And while I was certainly correct in my initial assessment of the trailer, what I wasn't expecting was that all the batshit insane visuals from the trailer happen in the first half hour of the movie. Just the Act 1 climax in Fury Road has some of the best action sequences I've ever seen, let alone the rest of the movie. So, it's a visual masterpiece, period, full stop. I think everyone agrees on that. And as is the case with a lot of visual masterpieces, people are complaining that there isn't enough story. While there are certainly plenty of movies that have both incredible visuals and an incredible story, a lot of people talk about movies like Mad Max as if you can't call them a masterpiece if they only have one and not the other. And this just isn't true. A good friend of mine, who knows way more about movies than I do, put it this way when Gravity came out 2 years ago. You never hear the complaint the other direction. If a movie has a brilliant story but less than brilliant visuals, people don't hesitate to call it a masterpiece. They don't drag their feet because the visuals were too simple. It just doesn't happen. And yet, if a movie has brilliant visuals and a less than brilliant story, it's somehow seen as lesser. Years ago, Jim Emerson wrote a great piece on No Country for Old Men, where he criticized people for talking about the technique, or the craft, or the style of the movie, as if those things were separate from the movie itself when talking about its quality. And they're not. Film is a visual medium. It's visual storytelling. Story is inextricably tied to visuals, and visuals are inextricably tied to story. All that said, I actually don't think Fury Road is lacking in the story department. Yes, the plot is basically one long chase sequence, but much more interesting than the story being told is the story not being told. In most post-apocalyptic movies, including the first Mad Max, anarchy dominates the landscape. But in Fury Road, there's at least a semblance of a societal structure. An effed up structure, but a structure nonetheless. After every society in the world has fallen, a new one is born. Is this new post-apocalyptic society one of cooperation and equality? No. It's one where the powerful few hoard essential resources in order to rule the many, and, quite literally, use people as their personal property. After millennia of societal advancement, that is the new society that forms when our species is facing extinction. What's that say about the nature of humanity? On the flip side, what happens to this one-sided societal power structure? Revolution. Just like thousands of confident governments and ideologies have been toppled by revolution before, Immortan Joe suffers the same fate. Is this saying that any corrupt, one-sided government will always be toppled? Will oppressed people always rise up against oppressors? These are complex and fascinating questions being raised, especially for a mindless action movie that has no story. I think I've hit my quota for air quotes in one review. The visuals alone make it a masterpiece, and the story is a lot more complex and thought-provoking than most action movies. Much to everyone's surprise, including my own, George Miller returned to a franchise 30 years after the previous entry, and made one of the best movies of the year and one of the best action movies ever. Need to catch up on all the Oscar-nominated movies? Watch them with Movies on Demand from the comfort of your home through your local cable provider. Go to rentmoviesondemand.com for more information. And while you're at it, you can win free Movies on Demand if you can predict the Oscars. Go to mod.moviesondemandpool.com and use the pool login information in the description below to join my personal Oscar prediction pool. But to win, you have to beat me. Good luck and happy Oscar season.